Welcome to another edition of the Taking Down Trump podcast. I'm Tristan Snell. Coming up, Michael Cohen joins us. Once Donald Trump's personal attorney and one of his closest confidants. Now, of course, he has turned a vocal critic, whistleblower, and star witness in the Manhattan DA's successful criminal prosecution of Donald Trump. Stay tuned for a conversation that you will not want to miss. But first, we're going to recap the craziest news from law and politics this week. One of them is certainly new revelations regarding Jeffrey Epstein and specifically regarding Donald Trump, where now we have further evidence of Trump flying with Jeffrey Epstein, appearing on flight logs, and we also have voluminous evidence of Trump placing many phone calls with Jeffrey Epstein, leaving messages with him, even in the middle of the night. We're talking calls at 3 a.m. And let's just get one thing clear. I have yet to hear any real evidence that there was ever any bona fide business relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. I have yet to see anything that constitutes proof that they did any kind of business together. Did they do any real estate developments together? Did Trump invest money with Epstein? I've never seen anything that proves that. That's the sort of thing that you hear from Trump loyalists. They try to say, oh, whatever, they did business together. Those were business meetings. Those were business calls. Who the hell is making a call at 3 a.m, even if there was a business deal? Who's making that call at 3 a.m.? Oh, you know what? I just thought about paragraph 17 there. We really need to change that section on liability. I think we need to restructure how we're thinking about that. You're making that call at 3 a.m. Yeah, right. I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. This is an area where investigative journalists and prosecutors need to roll up their sleeves and determine whether or not there's anything there, because there are accusations floating around now regarding Trump engaging in horrible sexual misconduct with Epstein's victims. Those accusations have been out there for years, but they're coming together all at once, and you're starting to see a critical mass form. And there is an opportunity here for enterprising publications and journalists and television and radio outlets to actually be looking into this. And whether or not they're going to do so will speak volumes about whether or not they actually see their role as holding both parties to account or just one. Moving on now overseas, where we got some rare good news in the fight for democracy, really good news in the fight for democracy. Let's just be real. Let's actually take a moment to enjoy and embrace what good news this was. Elections back to back in both the UK and France, with center-left coalitions winning smashing victories in both countries' national elections, neither of which were fully expected, especially in France. In France, it was actually thought that Marine Le Pen, leader of the National Front Party, the far-right party in France, the biggest far-right party in France, would actually have a shot at really bringing together a far-right government, or at least making further gains in the French parliament. And that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. So there, the polls and expectations from pundits and everything were just dead wrong. In the UK, it was widely expected that the Labour Party would win a majority in the UK parliament. However, it ended up being far larger than anticipated. It was a historically large victory for the Labour Party, with 410 seats in parliament. The next largest entrant, the Conservative Party, at 170. That is a very large majority that the Labour Party is going to have to work with there. That stands as a complete and utter rejection of Brexit, of the soft on Russia approach, of the economic lack of leadership from the Tories over the past 14 years of their rule. This was the end of 14 years of conservative dominance of UK government, and the wreckage that has caused economically, socially, to the fact that the disaster of Brexit occurred and is still continuing to send terrible reverberations throughout the UK economy. People are getting fed up, and the polls are not picking up on that, not just in America, but in these other countries too, in our two closest allies, in these democracies as well. The polls and the pundits are wrong. They were completely wrong. And it should give us heart about what's happening here in America. Don't look at the polls. Don't listen to these pundits. Look at the results. Look at what happened in the special election out on Long Island earlier this year in a suburban, very purple district in Long Island that had been thought to be Republican turf, that had been George Santos's district. And not only did the Democrat Tom Suozzi win, he won handily. Okay, if you look at the results, Democrats have been winning election after election after election, including doing so much better in the midterms than anybody expected them to. I think that the UK and France are very illustrative here and should give a lot of people a lot of pause before making these grandiose assumptions about what's going to happen here in America in November. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to keep on fighting, but it means we need to take heart and have faith that there are good things coming if we all stand up together and vote and stay united. I'll be getting back to that in a few minutes when I talk about Joe Biden. The other big thing I talked a minute ago about how stories, narratives often need to achieve a certain critical mass, right? It's not just that the facts are out there. The facts can be out there, but they aren't all being talked about at the same time. And that creates a salience, right? It creates a critical mass where all of a sudden it's tough getting public attention to focus on any one thing, right? Just because it's millions of people. How is everybody going to move in concert? But if you actually get a large enough group of people paying attention to the same thing at the same time, that is where you can really move public opinion, right? Then the public consciousness can shift. And it's tough to make that happen. Sometimes these things happen organically or just by luck. Sometimes they happen because a lot of people are doing a lot of great work at the same time. That's a long wind up to talking about Project 2025, which is going to be the subject of next week's show in much greater depth. But I'll simply say for now, there has been more chatter online about Project 2025 in the last week than in the rest of the time combined before that since it had been released. And for those who don't know, Project 2025 proposes to terminate the United States Constitution. It effectively would mean the end of elections and the end of having an elected presidency. It would mean that Trump is in power for the rest of his life. It would mean concentration camps for immigrants to this country. Millions of them would be herded into camps to be detained without due process. They are literally saying this in writing. Okay. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay. Those are just a couple of the headlines to think about. But they actually want to terminate the Constitution, and they actually want to set up concentration camps and send upwards of 12 million people into those concentration camps. It would be absolutely catastrophic on multiple different levels, and we're going to dig into it in greater depth. But I think the thing that's really important is that now more people are talking about it all at once, and we need to keep up the drumbeat. Donald Trump made a rare media mistake. He doesn't make too many. He's devilishly effective at using the media. There had been this drumbeat going on about Project 2025. He stupidly put his foot in his mouth by going on Truth Social and denying that he knew anything about Project 2025 or that it had anything to do with him, which is demonstrably false. You can see that the authors of Project 2025, if you go and look them up, and journalist Judd Legum did a good job of this yesterday, went through and figured out who all of those authors are and the roles that each of them held in the Trump administration. That itself went viral, and it completely puts the lie to what Trump was trying to say. Trump's now trying to distance himself from his own goddamn platform. Okay. And we cannot let him, because they have actually stated for all of us to go read exactly. Forget about the Republican platform for a second, which is bad enough. Project 2025 is what they really plan to implement. They basically came out of their experience with the first Trump White House and said, you know what? We didn't actually dismantle democracy quickly enough. We didn't fight back against government agencies quickly enough. We need to completely dismantle this thing from the inside from day one when we first get back in. We're going to fire a whole bunch of people. We're going to do a bunch of executive orders. It's effectively a blueprint for blitzkrieg on America. That is what it is. It is effectively governmental blitzkrieg, a coup from the inside. That is what they want to do. They want to get in and they want to dismantle the whole thing from the inside out. And we're going to talk about it a lot more next week. And everybody else needs to keep talking about it as we head into the Republican National Convention next week, because that is what the conversation needs to be about. It needs to be about Donald Trump and his cronies and what they plan to do if they get back into power. That is what this election is about. That is what the rest of this year needs to be about. And we need to keep up that drumbeat loud enough that finally folks in the media might pick it up too. They're starting to, but there's a long way to go and a lot more work for us to do, and we need to keep up the fight. Those are just some of the stories that I was following this week. As always, for the latest, make sure to follow me on Twitter and subscribe to the Substack. Coming up, a longer discussion about Joe Biden and why his debate was not what you think it was. Before Michael Cohen joins us, let's have a longer discussion about Joe Biden and the debate. Obviously, that is, unfortunately, the top story that is dominating mainstream media, the pressure campaign that is being exerted from at least some corners of the Democratic Party, and let's be real, mostly from the media itself, to push Joe Biden into quitting the race and saying that he should be replaced by some other candidate. Let's just talk about the debate for a second and exactly what happened there and why it should make everybody think more than twice about what is being said around all of this with Joe Biden. What happened with the debate? And it wasn't a good debate, but let's be real about what happened with the debate there. There were moments where Biden was at a loss for words, where he was looking for the right word. Mind you, let's just be really clear about this. The man has had a lifelong stutter. He has a disability. This is something he was born with. He had it as a kid. He learned how to compensate for it as an adult. The fact that people are mistaking his stutter for senility is absolutely appalling. And if you know anybody that has ever struggled with any kind of condition or different ability ever in their life, this should just be absolutely horribly insulting. It's now gone even worse, where the media, specifically the New York Times, and I have a lot of thoughts there that I'll just refrain from because I don't want to, change the profanity rating of this show. The New York Times went so far as to take the visits of a Parkinson's expert who came to the White House to talk about more funding for Parkinson's research and tried to say that that was having something to do with Joe Biden and his medical condition. Anybody who's had any family members suffer from that disease should be absolutely outraged that the New York Times would do such a thing. Here is the American government trying to do something good. And by the way, it's a bipartisan effort. This is in concert with even some Republicans in Congress to increase research funding in the fight against Parkinson's. And that was weaponized by the New York Times falsely, irresponsibly, to say that somehow it had something to do with Biden's health. But let's just come back to this for a second before I go really off the rails here, because there's a lot of emotions running high on this. What really happened in that debate? It wasn't Biden's health, okay? It was not Biden's age. It was a classic trap that Democratic politicians have been falling into for about 75 years now, more or less. And that is, at least once, if not all the time in a particular presidential campaign, the Democratic candidate will do their best imitation of a policy robot, where they're wound up, they're stuffed full of facts, and they need to get out there and be like, I am going to tell you the 73 things I did during my administration and or will do in the next one. And they rattle all of them off like a goddamn grocery list. Okay? That is what Joe Biden did during that campaign. Think about it for a second, especially if you've been watching politics for as long as I have. Okay. Every Democratic politician of my lifetime, especially the ones running for president, have at some point fallen prey to this trap. Okay. It's that policy wonk trap. It does well in certain circumstances within the hothouse of Democratic politics. People want to see that policy brain. Okay. It's considered to be a qualification for president in particular, but really pretty much for any office, right? Because Democrats actually care about public policy and about the function of the government. And thereby they want leaders who are going to show that off, that they actually get it, that they get it at a granular level of detail. I also think that Joe Biden and his advisors, unfortunately, took some of the media criticism to heart too much. And they went into that debate thinking, gosh, you know what? The media keeps on saying that we haven't talked about our accomplishments enough. That's what the pundits keep saying. So we're going to get in there and we're going to talk about all of Joe Biden's accomplishments. He was talking too quickly. He didn't pause enough. He was trying to give too many statistics. And having that much rehearsed material that he was supposed to spout off was a terrible idea. It's not on brand for him. And it was not a good idea for someone who has had a lifelong stutter, for him to have all of these complicated statistics that he was supposed to rattle off was just not a good idea. And it made him sound rushed. It made it sound forced. He wasn't interesting enough. There were no jokes. He landed a couple of sort of haymaker punches at Trump. He did. But there weren't enough lighter moments where he should have had a rehearsed line to actually make people at home smile or laugh. Okay. And Biden can do that. Biden needs to pull a page from 1984 when Ronald Reagan had a terrible first debate and got all of the media talking about his age and whether or not he should continue to run. And then in the next debate, in what was still a very close race at that time against Walter Mondale, Reagan very memorably joked about how he was not going to make his opponent's youth and inexperience an issue in the campaign. It's not that funny of a joke. It's what passes for a joke in politics, and I guess what passed for a joke in 1984. But at the time, everybody thought it was, Reagan's back. He's being so folksy and funny. Now, I'm not saying good things about Ronald Reagan overall, but the man knew how to campaign, and the man delivered a bravura performance that night. His poll numbers went up, and they stayed up. He had a really strong economy to back him in 1984 that he was able to claim credit for. And what had been a close race turned into a landslide. Biden probably has that in his head already, that that's what he wants to do. And if his team of advisors and speechwriters and whatever are too young to remember, or were not even alive when that happened in 1984, make them go back and watch the footage. Biden's been in politics since the 70s. He was a senator at the time in 1984. He remembers all of this, okay? But that's what he needs to do. He needs to come back, and he's already been doing it. And he needs to be funny. He needs to be folksy. He needs to slow down, and he needs to engage in some attacking of Trump. But you don't do it by then taking every single little point that Trump made and rebutting it one by one by one. He kept on having all of his answers be number one, number two, number three. It's boring. It was not the right approach. He just needed to throw some zingers in there. He needed to throw some insults at Trump to rattle him a little bit. That is what Joe Biden needed to do. The Joe Biden we saw in that debate is not usually the Joe Biden we see. And it's not because he's losing it. It's not because he's old. He already was old. He didn't get magically older before the debate. He's not magically younger since the debate, where he's turned in a lot of really good media performances and speeches. He was stuffed full of facts. Joe Biden fell into the same trap as John Kerry, as Al Gore, as Hillary Clinton, even, yes, as Barack Obama. Whenever Obama tried to get too much into the policy weeds, he would sound very boring and professorial. And that was actually part of why his first debate, when he ran for re-election in 2012 against Mitt Romney, he did terribly, and everybody panicked and everybody freaked out. Okay. And you can say, well, Barack Obama didn't have concerns about his age. This isn't about age. This is about Democrats being policy wonks and doing a poor job sometimes at being emotive, slowing down, telling stories, keeping it simple. You're there to win an election, not to be the smartest professor on the faculty. That is a mistake that a lot of Democratic politicians make. Very, very few people can make economic statistics sound fun or interesting or engaging. One of them was Bill Clinton in his prime, and that's about it. Maybe Pete Buttigieg today, I'd say, but there's very, very few people for whom that is true. Joe Biden was over-prepared for that debate, and if he simply dials it back and just acts like normal Joe Biden, he is going to be fine. And the notion that we should tear our center-left coalition apart, a coalition that just rode to massive landslide victories that weren't even predicted in the UK and France, and we're going to take our center-left coalition and start shooting at each other because of one bad debate, because the media thinks it might be more fun and interesting to have the chaos of an open convention, and so they won't shut up about it? No, that is insane. It is suicidal. We all need to take a deep breath and shut up. We need to make this election about Donald Trump, not about Joe Biden, because the threat to democracy is about Donald Trump. It's about Project 2025, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. Coming up, Michael Cohen on taking down Trump. Next. Today, we have a guest who really needs no introduction, Michael Cohen. Of course, Cohen was Donald Trump's personal attorney and self-described fixer for many years, handling a host of sensitive legal issues for Donald Trump and for the Trump Organization. Cohen's relationship with Trump then took a dramatic turn in 2018 when Cohen found himself in the crosshairs of multiple different criminal investigations, resulted in him doing prison time, in part for campaign finance violations that he committed in cahoots with Donald Trump. Those are now the same events that led to Trump's prosecution by the Manhattan DA's office earlier this year. He's written 2 tell-all memoir books, Revenge and Disloyal, both of them New York Times bestsellers. And of course, many of you probably know him from his weekly podcast, Mea Culpa, where he has been speaking truth to power for many years now and continues to do so every week. Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Tristan, it's always good to see you, my friend. Always good to see you. Today is actually a very unusual day, something that I'm sure you remember, but you may not remember it off the top of your head. Today's a very special day. 4 years ago today is the day that I was unconstitutionally remanded back to prison, thanks to dear old Donald and his bloviated attorney general, Bill Barr, when they lured me down to 500 Pearl Street and asked me to sign a counterfeit document that was violative of my First Amendment constitutional right. And when I asked to have paragraph number 1 changed so that it would not be so violative and so restrictive, they contacted the marshals, and I was handcuffed, shackled, put into a freezer, and then several hours later shipped back up to Otisville, where I spent another 16 days in solitary confinement.
That was for your book, right?
That was for the book. So Judge Hellerstein, in the hearing, turned around and said, the court finds that respondents, and for your listeners, respondents are the defendants, DOJ, Trump, Bill Barr, etc. The court finds that respondents' purpose in transferring Cohen from release on furlough and home confinement back to custody was retaliatory in response to Cohen desiring to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish a book critical of the president and to discuss the book on social media. Imagine.
If that doesn't give everybody else, especially folks in the media, a taste of what could happen if Trump gets back into office, it's bad enough that it happened to you. I almost feel like it's a template. This is a warning shot of the kinds of things that he could do to anybody who wants to speak out against it.
Now, I want you to couple that with the Supreme Court of the United States' recent presidential immunity, he is now emboldened and empowered to do exactly what they did to me, to you, and to every other critic or any person that, for whatever the reason might be, he has an issue with. This is insanely un-American, anti-democratic, unconstitutional, and it is the very beginning to how autocracies, dictatorships, monarchies are created. You stifle people's First Amendment right. And then you go ahead and you create your own paramilitary. You create your own, or you take over the military. Well, we know that the only people that will work for Trump, if in fact that he is reelected, they will all have to be loyalists and sign a loyalty pledge to him. How do you stop somebody like that? The answer is you don't. And that's why this election is, as I said in 2019, when I testified before the House Oversight Committee, and so many of these idiot pundits out there on television, in the press, they all started attacking, Michael's just being hyperbolic. When I said, and I was the first to say it, my biggest fear is if that Donald Trump loses in 2020, that there will never be a peaceful transfer of power. And I was right, unfortunately. My next prediction is if Donald Trump wins in 2024, there will never be another election as you know it. I dread being right in this case. Sadly, I know that I'm not. I am not wrong.
Michael, let's talk about the prosecution in New York, of which, of course, you were such a major part. Because I would really
love. Are we talking about the New York DA case, or are we talking about the Manhattan DA case?
We'll talk about the Manhattan DA case, the campaign cover-up case, as I like to call it. I would really love to get your personal perspective, how this all went from your eyes. The dust is not entirely settled, of course. Part of why we wanted to talk this week was to talk about the sentencing, which now, of course, has been delayed. But I think that now that the trial is over, it'd be great to just hear a little bit more about how it looked from your perspective. You testified in front of Congress. That really started to pull the lid off of a lot of this illegal conduct that had been going on in Trump land. How did that investigation begin from your perspective?
Well, the investigation started well before that. I had testified 7 times before Congress. I know people think that I only testified once. That was the one that was live before the House Oversight Committee. In fact, the day before, I testified before the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence for 9 hours. And then the day after my public appearance before the House Oversight Committee, I testified before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And then I ended up coming back about 2 weeks later, again, to the House Permanent Select, because they didn't finish.
You were no stranger to lengthy bouts of testimony, right? People marveled at the fact that you were cross-examined for 25 hours. You'd already been through this.
When I was in Otisville, and yes, you're right, during the House Oversight Committee, when AOC started asking me some of those very pertinent questions about Donald Trump's finances, and then there was other members of Congress as well that asked, and I'm talking about Democratic members of Congress. Not one Republican member of Congress asked me a single question regarding Donald or regarding anything. Basically, they took their 5 minutes to, impugn my credibility, to disparage me. They all said the exact same thing. It was a shit show that really wasn't worth my time. But I was there, and they had their 5 minutes. So they would use that in order to appease their master, who is the president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. When I was in Otisville, after about 4 months of being there, I got a phone call from my wife that Lanny Davis, who's an attorney that had worked with me, wanted me to call him, that it was very important. It's not like you have a cell phone or access. You have to use the payphone. You have to use the payphone, which I did. I called Lanny, and he said, I need to come up and to see you. It's a long ass drive for him from DC to upstate New York. He goes, but it's really important. I need to talk to you. I said, sure. And so he came up and he said to me that he didn't want to talk over the phone because the phones are monitored by correctional officers, and you never knew who was going to be listening. And if they were a Trump loyalist, they would reach out to DOJ or to even their superiors, and that they would then provide information to the sitting president, Bill Barr, the DOJ, etc. That would be injurious to me because at any given moment, they can do with you as they want. When you're an inmate, even though I was the lowest level inmate in the entire federal system, and that where I was located didn't even have fences. There were only like 2 guards, and I had access to a car. I used to drive around and power tools and you name it. We were in what they call a satellite camp. He comes in, he sees me, he says, I spoke with my friend Cyrus Vance, who's the Manhattan DA, and they would like to send up a team of DAs, prosecutors, to meet with you and to talk to you about some questions they have. After some back and forth, I agreed. Lanny and Mike Monaco, who was another one of my attorneys, he was from Chicago, criminal defense attorney, came up and spent some time with me with these 5 different prosecutors from the Manhattan DA's office. And that again was under Cyrus Vance. In fact, they came up 3 different times to engage in question and answer. After my release, I was ultimately contacted again by Cy Vance's office to meet with Mark Pomerantz, which I did about 10 additional times. Well, then the election came, and Cy Vance decided not to rerun for DA, and Alvin Bragg ran and won. It was approximately 6 months or 4 months or so after Alvin Bragg became the district attorney did I start receiving phone calls again from the DA prosecutors if I would come in and meet with them. And they took a little bit of a different strategy than their predecessor. Suffice it to say, after 23, 24 meetings with the DA's office in total, I was ultimately asked to testify before a grand jury, which I did. And then, of course, I was subpoenaed to be a witness at the Manhattan DA trial that you were referencing. And that's how it all came about. I felt that it gave me an opportunity to continue to speak truth to power, to correct the lies, the misinformation, disinformation that Trump and his acolytes have been putting out about me for 6 years. Once they realized that I was no longer in the camp, when I spoke to George Stephanopoulos during that one-on-one interview, and I stated that my first loyalty belongs to my wife, my daughter, my son, and my country, and always will. That's when they realized they need to go on a complete and total smear campaign of me, making up lie after lie after lie, in hopes that all they would need to do is to continue this denigration so that anytime I would end up going before any court or tribunal, all that they would need to say is, oh, he's a liar. He's a liar. Very much like what even Todd Blanche did, right? When he was calling me a gloat, the greatest liar of all time. My retort back to Todd Blanche, you can call me whatever you want, but here's what the entire country and the world knows, that he is what's called a sloat. And that's the stupidest lawyer of all times, because as a criminal defense lawyer, despite the fact this was only his second defense case that he's ever done, he was a prosecutor before. But as the second time around, one thing that any criminal defense lawyer knows is you do not let your client dictate to you the defense strategy, which not only do I say that he did, he acknowledged on Fox and Friends that that's exactly what happened. Trump directed him.
Yeah, he referred to Trump as micromanaging him. Yeah, and that they were doing the litigation together. Yeah, that's not exactly a recipe for success, especially when the client is Trump.
Well, and especially
So,
when you see the ultimate verdict of 34 counts of guilt.
I think he had a strong hand in his quote unquote defense in the E. Jean Carroll cases too. And we saw how those went.
Then again, he had maybe the second Sloat. We'll call her Sloat Jr. I mean,
Right.
with all due respect, I mean, Alina Habba is not somebody that one would call a legal beagle. She is a wonderful, wonderful advocate for him in front of a microphone. She has all the talking points down packed. Nevertheless, that's all that they are. They had no effect upon whether it's Judge Engoron in the New York Attorney General civil fraud trial. It had zero impact on the E. Jean Carroll cases. She has basically failed in just about every single case that she has represented him on. What they'll do is they'll have a sort of a irrelevant victory in something, and she will declare, as Donald does, full and total vindication. That this has been totally vindicated. We have won, and it's the end of the case. So far, of course, none of that has held true. But then again, they are certainly winning the media war, or I would say they're winning the war on public opinion. There's no doubt about that one.
As concise as you can get it, what do you think prosecutors are doing right in these cases against Trump, particularly the case, the Manhattan DA case that you were involved in? And where do you think they could be doing things better?
I think it's only fair that we group all of these cases together into one basket. And we'll start with the E. Jean Carroll cases. The defamation case, the sexual assault, the rape case, guilty. Let's then move on to the defamation portion of it. Guilty to the tune of $93 million in total.
Yep.
Let's then take it to the New York Attorney General, the Letitia James case, as it's so widely called, our unsinkable New York Attorney General, Tish James. Judge Engoron's determination of guilt to the tune of about $500 million. Then we take it to the criminal case of the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, by Judge Juan Merchan, with 12 jurors and 6 alternates, the 12 jurors returning 34 counts of guilt. Put them all into a basket, and you ask a wonderful question, Tristan, which is, what are they doing right? And the answer is, they're demonstrating truth to power. That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
They're putting truth in front of an independent person. They can argue and say Judge Engoron is conflicted. That's part of the Trump narrative. Judge Juan Merchan is conflicted. He's Democratic plant. They can say the 12 jurors are all Democrats. They can turn around and say the prosecutors are all Democrats. They use the same line across the board. Everybody's crooked. Everybody's in on it. And it's all designed within which to hurt Donald J. Trump. The only thing that is used that hurts Donald J. Trump is truth. And the truth is not merely Michael Cohen's statement. It's other corroborating testimony by the 19 other witnesses, including individuals that claim to still be loyal to Donald, like David
That's
Pecker,
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Or like Hope Hicks or Madeline Westerhout. They never had falling outs with Donald, but their testimony corroborated what I was saying. So all they are doing is putting forth to the American people truth. And truth has never been a friend to Trump.
So one more thing that I'd really love to get into with you, pertaining to what's in the news right now, given your knowledge of how Trump operates, how he thinks, what tends to set him off, how to potentially combat him. If you were on Joe Biden's team right now, what advice would you be giving him about the best way to fight Trump.
So it's funny because myself and a member of Congress reached out to Biden's campaign team, and I spoke to a young gentleman there who has a pretty significant position and offered our services to go to Camp David during preparation so that I could provide them with a strategy on what Biden needs to do to have been effective during this debate. And I think it only fair to state the obvious that they did not take me up on my offer.
No,
that
they
the
did not.
debate was catastrophic. It was a horrendous display by Biden. He was not properly prepared for this debate.
That's right.
And the funny thing is, Donald did not prepare himself for this debate either. He spent 15 minutes here and there with different people who are saying that they're going to bring this up. And his response is always, I'm good. I know that. I know it. Because he had no interest in talking truth. He didn't have any interest in providing facts. During his administration, he, as an example, increased the deficit by $7 trillion. He doesn't know that, even though it was his administration. He doesn't care. He'll just say, I had the greatest economy ever in the history. The stock market was at the high of all time ever, right? And the saddest part is you had these two moderators, these two limp jerk-offs, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, sitting there and allowing Trump to spew lie after lie after lie unchecked. And they'll say, well, that's not the rules. That wasn't the way we agreed. Bullshit. You're a moderator. You're not a question reader. Because if you were just there to read the questions and turn on and off mics, we could have had an AI program do the same thing in anyone's voice, Tristan, in your voice, in my voice. It doesn't matter. Instead, they needed. It wasn't a moderated debate. It was a waste of 90 minutes. It was basically a bunch of bullshit. Minute after minute, half hour after half hour for an hour and a half. There are strategies that Joe Biden needed to employ right from the very beginning. The first question that came to Joe Biden, he answered wrong if you want to get under Donald's skin. And that's what he needed to do. From the very inception, regardless of what the question is. First thing you come out and you say, because I think they asked him about the economy, and he should have responded. Unlike my opponent, the stable genius standing beside me. You see the reaction that you just got? That's the reaction that all of America would have gotten. Joe Biden is here to fight. And Donald would never have been able to settle himself in as he did so comfortably. Spewing lie after lie. And Joe Biden didn't need to attack the specifics of the lie. Just keep calling him a liar. No. So, unlike my opponent, the stable genius standing beside me, the economy under him was not the greatest economy in America's history. And I'm going to tell you this. The stock market, as an example, hit an all-time high under Trump of 40,000 under his administration. But when he tells you, the stable genius, because he knows it all, that it was the highest stock market ever during my administration, it's exceeded 41,000. Now, since he's such a whiz with math, I do want to say, so he understands, simple mathematics, 41,000 is greater than 40,000. That's how he needed to do it. So you have a little bit of humor thrown in there with a little bit of denigration because Donald knows that he's stupid. He knows that he's unread. He's got great instinct, but he's not read. So when it comes to talking facts, he's not capable of doing that. And he hates to be called stupid because that's his thin skin. And there's many other things that he doesn't like either. And what you need to do is every single question that's asked, you need to go back to 2, 3, or at most 4. But stick with more like 3, because 3 is always the number that Americans remember. One of which would be calling him a stable genius, right? Things like that, constant repetition of those words gets under his skin. If I was the one debating him, I would have gotten under his skin before the third question finished, and he would have walked off the stage.
Michael, always a pleasure to chat with you. I think we probably could go on for another hour or two, but we'll save it for another time. Thank you so much for stopping by the show.
Tristan, it's always great to see you, my friend. Stay strong, and to your listeners, make sure that you're fully registered to vote. There is not a vote that can be overlooked in this upcoming election. And make sure that you are registered to vote, vote.org. Make sure that you ask all your friends, your family, your colleagues, your neighbors. Make sure that you ask everybody. There's nothing wrong with asking, hey, by the way, Tristan, you registered to vote? No? Here, let me show you how to do it. Because the thing that's going to give Trump a leg up is the potential apathy.
100%. Thanks, Michael.
Be well, my friend.
We'll see you next time. For more from Michael, make sure you are listening to and following his podcast, Mea Culpa. It is required listening every time it's on. That's all for today's show this week. If you like what you're hearing, make sure to follow this podcast and share it with your friends. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter and subscribe to the Substack for free so that you get all of the latest content delivered to your inbox. Thanks, and see you next Wednesday. Thank you for watching my podcast, Taking Down Trump. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for weekly episodes like this one, featuring some of the top voices from the pro-democracy movement. New episodes every Wednesday. See you next week.